and welcome to another crossover event of Lizzie Watches Yaoi, crossing over with myself and Gaia's horror podcast Beneath Your Skin. And we are talking about the wonderful anime Vatican Miracle Examiners because, well, it's about two gorgeous priests who clearly love each other, solving cases of demonic possession, demonic rituals, and the evils of the world. Therefore, it kind of falls into both those umbrellas. Hi, Gaia, how are you today?
I'm a little bit in pain, but because of our boys, I feel already better.
Okay. So the body hurts, but the soul is nourished today.
Yes. Yes.
Right, so our episode opens with a bit of a false start. You're like, oh no, what's happened? So Joseph and Julia are talking, and they're talking about the unfortunate death of Samsung and how it's just like, oh, it's so unfair and things have changed, and Joseph doesn't really know who to turn to, and Julia's like, oh, what about you and Roberto? And he's like, oh, Roberto's just not himself anymore, and he's become obsessed. He stopped coming to church, he's not doing his prayers, he's just obsessed with the books, and he's just not the man I know anymore, and we're just on opposite sides because I believe this is truly a miracle. I can find no scientific evidence that this is not a miracle, that John is not a saint. But Roberto won't believe me. He's just so convinced that this is all a fake and all a fraud, and he won't talk to me about it, and we are now on opposite sides, and I just can't stand by him anymore. And Joseph is like, I just cannot stay by Roberto's sides. I cannot stand by him. And you see him walking down the corridor, and he totally shuns Roberto, who's standing there. And we're like, oh God! After the last episode, they're on opposite sides, and they've had a fight because Roberto's looking sad, and Joseph just completely ignores him. And you're like, heartbreak!
Yeah, and I was so shocked. I was like, wait, what did I miss? Because, okay, at the end of the last episode, Roberto was going crazy. That's true, but what happened to have this deep gap between them? And I was like, what are you doing, Joseph? This is not the moment to leave him behind, to leave his side just because you don't agree with him about John Jordan. And why are you so sure John Jordan is a saint? And I was like, okay, no, please tell me something is going on. This because I couldn't handle such an heartbreak.
No, not between our beautiful boys. Well, we get our wonderful opening, which is gorgeous, and I love it. And we get the title of the episode, which is Only Through Death Can We Fully Comprehend Rebirth into Eternal Life, which is obviously referencing this secret ritual that kind of slows down death, kills people in the Bazuta? I've just pronounced that completely wrong. Bazuna religion, and puts them into a state of death to allow them to kind of be brought back to life. And it's like, oh, only by dying can you understand what eternal life means, because obviously the corpses are kept pristine because of what we later find out about how they are creating this ritual. So the episode opens that our beautiful boys are not talking to each other, and Kid is going, oh, I didn't expect you to turn up at this thing. Like, I mean, I understand Joseph, because, he believes this, but I didn't expect you to come here. And Roberto is like, no, this is my place. I have to see this through as well. And we are at a presentation, and Kid is obviously looking smug as hell and just being an absolute slime ball. And he is going to announce the final prophecy of John Jonas to the world. And he's obviously going to televise it because he likes a bit of money and fame and all those good, sins that our boys are against. And he's going to televise this, and he is going to prove to this live audience that Jonas left one last prophecy for them all, and it's definitely going to be true, and it's definitely going to be the biggest thing ever. And it's like, oh, you're just after fame and glory and fortune, you gold-digging, horrible person. So he reveals that the last prophecy is going to be about a volcano. And he's like, oh, the volcano at the foot of the mountains J near a windmill is going to, erupt and kill lots of people. And it's like, where do we know where there is a wind machine at the bottom of the mountain? And someone in the crowd shouts out the name of the place they're living. It's like, of course, that's it. Quick, people, I know you are watching this. You must evacuate. You're all going to die. It's the final prophecy. And he's all gung-ho about this prophecy about a volcano that's about to erupt any moment now, apparently, and kill everybody in the city near where they live. And he seems pretty confident about this. He's got the paintings of the volcanoes, and he's got the other last paintings of Jonas up on the stage. I mean, I'm half expecting him to auction off the paintings at the end of this event for like more money, because he just seems that corrupt. But Roberto stands up and goes, "No, I say lies," and persists to disprove and pretty much tear Kid apart and tear everything apart. And I'm just like, this is why I love you, Roberto, so much. Not only are you smart and wonderful, you're confident, you've put everything together, and you are taking this man down on live television and putting him in his place, because that's what he needs to do. He doesn't need to just be arrested for being dingbat. He needs to be put in his place, and he needs to have everything disproved. And he does. He goes, well, yes, there is a volcano that begins with J with a wind plant at the bottom. But in all honesty, we're listening to this in the country that has this. But to other people, it could be any country. There's a lot of other countries with volcanoes and wind plants in them. It's like, and the audience are kind of like, yeah, it's a little bit of a teeniest like link. Oh no, actually, he's kind of sounding a bit like, because there's no geological proof. Like, I mean, I've watched Dante's Peak, and while it's not exactly accurate, I also did do environmental geology as a BA, so I know a little bit about geology and things, and you do get signs that a volcano is going to erupt, and all the volcanoes of the world are under continuous observation by, I'm going to call them the geology police, but they're not the geology police, but there's an organisation that monitors them to make sure there's no deviance in their seismic activities or the amount of sulfur dioxide that's being produced in the area or the changes in like vegetation as signs of like potential upcoming like disasters. Or you can watch the simplified version of it and watch Dante's Peak, but it kind of explains, like, you know, in a hockey movie kind of way, some of the science behind monitoring volcanoes. Just like there's like, you know, twister chasers that go around chasing storms and twisters. There's people who keep an eye on all the active volcanoes and tectonic spots of the world so that they can't spontaneously combust because someone drew a picture of a volcano. But yeah, so he goes on to say, out of the 4,000 prophecies that John Jonas had, only 66 of them came true. The statistic seems a bit odd. And Kid, in all his craziness, is like, how could you say that? How could you say this? What about this prophecy? Blah, 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 blah. And calm and collective and wonderfully, Roberto is like, well, if you actually look at that word can be interpreted in this language as that. And if it was talking about Vulcan's Forge, it's talking about, like, Etna in Sicily, which is completely a different location. And then it's like, well, what about this prophecy? It's like, well, if you actually look at the stars for Venus, they also align with this and this one, depending on the dates you were looking at. And he's like, well, how was John Jonas supposed to know the exact, like, you know, axis or diagonal like numbers to equate that? And Roberto's like, but didn't God send the prophecies? Are you telling me that God doesn't understand how to work out those precise numbers? And he's like, he's like, well, what about I can't remember her name now, Diana, who dies in thorns in the river? And it's like, Naomi, that's not. That's it, Naomi. Yes. I don't know where I got Diana from. I'm pretty sure there was something beginning of D. Oh, the book Dion. That's it. I knew there was something of D in it. And it's like, yeah. So Naomi, you know, covered in thorns, died in the river, is like, well, that's a prophecy as well. And Roberto is just calmly putting all these down, putting him in his place, and going, no, actually, that is not. You are just creating self-fulfilling prophecies. Because he's also like, and what about Amy? Amy died exactly how it was written. And he was like, well, you say that, but the paper did not smell old. The paper smelt new. And he's like, what are you talking? How? A piece of paper is like, well, if this had been typed up by Johannes, this would have been an older prophecy. But the ink on this paper was very fresh within a couple of days like of this, and only like maybe a day of the murder. Like, it's just like, it's a bit like fishy that you magically found this prophecy that predicted this like woman's death. And he's like, what are you saying it was me? And he's like, damn right I'm saying you murdered her, wrote a false like prophecy and then claimed it as one of Johannes' prophecies to further your own ambitions and your own cause. And he's like, oh, blah blah blah, no, it can't be, what about this? And he's like, well, I have proof for that as well. Because if you look at this painting, it's clearly about someone being murdered. It's clearly John Johannes acting out his own desires and his desire to kill and putting it onto paint. He's like, what, are you saying Johannes was a murderer? And it's like, yes, he was a murderer. And you have no proof that Johannes was a murderer. And then we get the big tragic revelation and also it turns out both of our ideas around it are true. The fact is, John Johannes is in fact Roberto's father. And it's just like, oh, poor Roberto, poor Roberto. There we go, that's the poor Roberto bingo ticked again for this episode. So Roberto recounts his tragic backstory, that as a young boy, his mother knew that the father was getting more and more in debt, more and more unhinged, domestically abusive, no money, alcoholism, and he was just a horrible, horrible man. So she takes Roberto and runs away, trying to save them both from the father's wrath. Unfortunately, the father catches up with them, murders the mother in front of Roberto, and then goes, you will never escape me, and goes to murder Roberto. Luckily, neighbours overheard the commotion and the police arrived just in time to save Roberto's life. But this obviously traumatised Roberto like nobody's business, and he has repressed all these images, he's repressed all these memories, including the face of his father, because it's just far too traumatic remembering your father murdering your mother in front of you and then trying to murder you. And he says that the fingerprints that are on the painting of Naomi, you can tell that the hands were not painted. The hands on the picture, he painted the paint on his hands, then put them to the neck of his painting. And because he had the stigmata signs, that's what left the mark. And the fingerprints taken from that match the fingerprints of Roberto's father. And they're like, so, they've got the same fingerprints, they are the same person. And obviously, if, and he's Bruno Puccini?
Puccini.
Yeah. Bruno Puccini was the murderer, and he he escaped and, was never found again, but they've got the same fingerprints. And Roberto is like, I am the son of Bruno Puccini, and I know what my father did in the past, and because I was oppressed, I did not recognise the face of my father at first, but I knew there was something strange about this. But it started triggering all these flashbacks that I took as nightmares and things. It turns out it was me trying to confront my own past and the terrible ordeal I've been through, and Johannes was still acting out and still reliving this moment of killing his wife. And you're just like, whoo, Jesus Christ, that's a lot on one poor man. And Kid is just like, you don't have any other proof. And then at this point, Joseph pipes up and is like, Joseph to the rescue with science! And he gets to science everything with his big bag of sciencey stuff. And he's just like, well, this is all I found. And here in my bag is a preserved monkey. And I'm like, you're just carrying around a preserved monkey? Okay, fair enough. But the monkey and Johannes's body share some commonality. Because obviously Kid is going, if he is not a saint, if he is not a prophet, how come he is not decaying? How come he is being preserved? God must have forgiven him for his past sins and rewarded him as a prophet. And it's just like, nope, all of that is bullcrap as well. Because it turns out that this ancient ritual that the Bazuna tribe uses to, be a ritual, basically. I've got no other way of explaining it. This ancient ritual that the Bazuna tribe does includes a very rare microbe that, once injected into a creature, slows down their death process, because it infects their entire body, slows down their death, slows down their decomposition. But in replacement of it, it kind of gives this weird elasticity, rubbery kind of texture to their flesh, to their skin, to their body, as they kind of slowly decay in a different way, because it's not a natural biological decay. And one of the side effects of this microbe is psoriasis of the liver, which the monkey has, and it turns out that Mr. Johannes has as well. And if they did leave him indeed for long enough, eventually he would decay. But at the moment he's got the rubbery texture. Joseph has done his sciencing and has proven that the microbe is in there, and the whole thing is just a giant hoax. And it was basically, Kid knew that Johannes was a murderer, but was profiteering off like these fake prophecies and was able to sell them with the selling of his book. And yeah, it's not a very nice guy. So Kid is all like, no, shut up, don't tell them the things, I'm going to twat you with my cane. And just before he twats Joseph, FBI Bill is like, no, I'll stop you, you are under arrest. You've got some, like, explaining to do, mister. Now I want to know more about why you killed Amy just to, like, further your own ambitions. And he's all like, oh no, I'm being arrested. And we're like, yay. But before, the very last minute, before he's arrested, he goes, no, I know who the real culprit is. The real culprit is Father Julia. And we're like, oh. And just as we find that, it flashes to somebody with a sickle is murdering Father Julia, and he is looking not best pleased. He is looking particularly shocked. I don't think he was expecting to get murdered. So full of shock and, oh my goodness, he is sickled to death. And we get a little breather in our halfway point. It's like, intense beginning.
Yeah, and even if it was proved that those prophecies were right, at some point Kid says, today is the day we will prove John was a saint. No, slow down. To be declared a saint is a very long process, and it requires some steps. First of all, to be named a saint, you need to have 2 post-mortem miracles done by your name, by your body, by your apparition, by something related to you. 2, not 1, because only if you only want to be to go through the ether for beatification, then you only need 1 post-mortem miracle. But for sainthood, you need 2. And second step, you need to prove you lived a life of pure goodness. So to be sinless is not a requirement to become a saint. You have to have lived your life in such a good way, dedicating your own life to others, or you have to be dead in an heroic death like martyrdom, or you must have gone through such a conversion of the earth, leaving behind a life made by pure sins in exchange for a life dedicated to goodness. And only the Pope at the end can declare you a saint. No one else can. So even if those prophecies were real, the ether would have been so long. And for what we saw, even if the prophecies were real, he would only have been a prophet.
So they go to look at Julia's body, and they say that it was Oriola. I think that's how you pronounce his name, Ololia. I can't pronounce him, but I call him the groundskeeper. And the groundskeeper was doing some shifty digging in the last episode. It's like, there's something a bit shifty if you wouldn't talk to anybody. But it turns out that he has murdered Julia. And we also find that there's a weird draft because it moves Joseph's hair, and you're like, what's this? And lo and behold, it's another secret chamber. I love it. It's the Vatican hunters always find the secret chamber. And we're like, ooh, what's this secret chamber? Is it going to be hideous human experiments again? Yes, it is hideous human experiments and demonic rituals. It's like, my goodness, it's people attempting to make black magic. So they go down into Julia's secret lair of fancy tea sets and teapots, which have the little, not the crown, the crest, have the crest of the family of Bourbonia, who are obviously the ancient French family that had hidden treasures and were dabbling in black magic and trying to kind of create their own version of voodoo and hoodoo mythology within them. And it's like, wait a minute, some black magic is going down on here. And we find nothing but jars and jars and jars of human hearts. And we're like, okay, so has Julia been harvesting people's hearts? Where is he getting these people? And then we kind of start thinking, oh my goodness, all those people that Julia helps with these missions to other villages to cure the sick. Is he just going there, finding poor, people that are just so poor, so So they will just like follow the beautiful man back to his home, get a cup of tea, and have their heart cut out. It's like, oh, Julia, you're so beautiful, but you're so bad. And then we also see that there are beds covered in blood where people have clearly been strapped to that have demonic symbols like drawn on them. There's pentagrams in blood, and we're like, yeah. And one of the things grossly they find, Joseph is like, I have found a bit of umbilical cord from approximately like a 2-week-old baby. And it's like, oh, that's grim. And he's like, I bet if we tested this, it would match the DNA from the missing child that was in Amy. And so they find out must have been where Amy was abducted to and murdered. And Bill is probably like, what did they do to her in her last days? What horrible things must they have done to her? And I'm like, poor girl. What a horrible thing to have happened to you. And it's, yeah. I also like the fact that as they go into this place, Joseph is like, Roberto, watch out for snakes. And you're just like, oh my goodness, you've got to get over this now. And Roberto's like, and you too, like, but yeah, so Joseph is still really paranoid about snakes and Roberto, and I'm like, there are not going to be snakes in a secret underground laboratory just roaming around. It's very well sealed, it's all very, like, surgically clean, but it's alright. Every time they open the door, every time they go anywhere, Joseph is like, Roberto, watch out for snakes. It's like, oh, you care so much, oh.
And we see also a bedroom with toys and stuff. And for a moment, we fear the worst. Roberto says, did Julia have a child? But no, it turned out that the person living in this bedroom with all the toys and the plushies and everything that could make a child very happy was an adult man. And then we have the Borbone crest on the teapot set. And we go back in time to the legend of the man with the iron mask. That was said to be the twin brother to Louis XIV, King of France, condemned to spend his life in prison with his face covered by an iron mask, because, of course, the throne can't be split. So the moment twins were born inside royal families, one of them had to go. So did Julia have a twin brother who died in his place? Because the way this person looked at the shite coming closer and closer, it was of pure terror. It wasn't like Julia at all. I mean, I can see Julia facing death with a smug expression on his face, like he knows that somehow he will find his way back or something as dark as that. So the fear on his face was out of characters. But if he was the person playing in the bedroom with all those toys, we can imagine another horror story of a beautiful child in a man's body being sacrificed to cover up for the real Julia.
Yeah. It's like, oh, the minute you see that bedroom, you're like, wait a minute. At first I was like, did they keep Amy's baby? And I'm like, no, Amy's baby would only be a couple of months old and would definitely not be able to like even like hold a crayon, let alone draw some squiggles, until Roberto goes, wait a minute, no, there's fingerprints of an adult here. There was an adult staying in this room. Then they go back upstairs and he looks at Julia's body and he's like, that's not Julia. Like, whoever Father Julia is, that's not him. And people are like, are you sure? And he's just like, this is something I know. And they go back to the Vatican, and there's a little bit of tomfoolery with the head honcho being like, this was televised, you have humiliated everything, how are you going to atone, which one of you is responsible for this PR debacle, and this like, and all these people you've made mad, and our two boys are like, I shall be to blame, no, I'll be to blame, essentially, with like Roberto going, it was my fault, I exposed it on national television, I brought shame, fire me, make me resign. And obviously Joseph is like, no, I was the one who did this, and I was the one that pretended said that we were fighting so Julia wouldn't suspect me when I secretly, like, did my research. And Roberta was like, yes, but it was me and it was my father that did this. And as they're both trying to fall on the sword for the other one, to protect the other one, because, God, these boys love each other. Lots of long, lingering looks in this episode of like, oh my God, you guys are beautiful. And obviously, there's chuckling, and it's like, I'm just teasing you guys. And it's like, how about you both atone by staying in service and keep doing what you're doing? Because your examinations, your investigations are really impressing an aspect of the Vatican, and we need people like you that will go in and do this type of research, these type of investigations, and no one does it quite as well as you guys. And it's like, their skills are respected, and they work so hard. And it's like, oh, that's really nice. And then we find out a little bit more about, like, kids' like involvement, but also the Bourbono involvement, who may have been the people putting up the money as a front, because it's always about something else. And it turns out that because of these prophecies, it was like destabilizing the value of the land at these areas, which allowed the corporation to go in and buy up the land. And, you know, it's like, oh, it's always about money, it's always about oil, it's always about screwing people over. Then it turns out the reason Samson was killed was because it was Samson that put the black mamba into Roberto's, and he was working for Kid as well. And, you know, after like guilt and stuff, and they needed to silence him, and turns out his family had been long dead, and he was just a desperate man, but I guess he needed to be silenced. And Olio has hung himself out of like guilt for murdering. But I get the feeling that Olio knew what Father Julia was up to and was waiting for his moment and murdered him for the sake of all those poor innocent people that had been killed themselves. So I don't see him as a bad guy. I do think it's unfortunate that he may have killed someone that isn't the Father Julia we know, but he thought he was doing the right thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we got the answer to the question I asked during the past episode. Why in the opening credit we see Julia in civilian clothes? Because I have a feeling Julia was never a priest at all. And he is dressed in this very fancy jacket that reminds us of something that royalty would wear when the Bourbon were on the throne of France. So I think we will learn more about Julia.
Yes. I like how he's racking up, like, not only is he a Borgia, he's also somehow doing the Bourboniers. And I'm like, Jesus, could you get any more influential, rich, or corrupt in your little, like, travelling around of Europe?
Technically, Cesare Borgia was, by marriage, he became a relative of the King of France because he married his sister. But it was too early, so the dynasty was still the dynasty of the Valois. But the Valois and the Bourbon were both powerful families, and that's why the moment the Valois dynasty ended, because only La Reine Margot, the Princess Margherita, was left of the Valois dynasty, she married Henry of Guisa, who became Henry IV of France, the first king of the Bourbon dynasty. So they are related.
Oh.
And we don't know. We know that Cesare Borgia had a daughter with the Princess of France, but we don't know what happened to her. So it's possible that Father Julia is both a Bourbon somehow and a Borgia.
Oh my goodness. What pedigree, but obviously not really heading in the right direction, because he's also clearly mad and likes to experiment on people and is trying to find the secret of eternal life, is what I'm thinking. Well, we get our lovely, beautiful, romantic moment out in the world, and it's like, Roberto, don't cry! Roberto is upset, obviously, that his father is a murderer, and he turns to Joseph and he's like, I have the blood of a murderer inside me. I have the blood of evil in me. I'd understand if you didn't want to be around me. I'd understand if you wanted to, like, leave me. And he starts tearing up, and there's tears welling up in his eyes, and he's so, like, and obviously Joseph, being beautiful, beautiful little Joseph, is just like, no. It doesn't matter what blood runs through your veins. You are who you are. And I will be with you, and I will stand by you forevermore. I love the fact it is unending, and forevermore I will be with you. And also, the lovely line is like, no, it does not make me hate you, because Roberto's like, you hate me now. It's like, I didn't hate you. I'm just learning to like you more and more. And it's just, oh, he loves them even more. And it's just like, it's such a beautiful moment, and it's just like, they just smile at each other, long looks, and just pretty much admitting that, like, yeah, Joseph is fallen even more in love with Roberto, because, well, who wouldn't? Roberto is everything.
Indeed.
Then we get our lovely credits, and in amongst our credits we see that, obviously, the perfect date after all of this, they go for ice cream and karaoke. Can you imagine the karaoke parlour when two priests walk in and go, I'll have some ice cream and some karaoke, please? And I'm like, fair enough, they're still young guys and they want to have ice cream and karaoke. And I love it. It's like, oh.
God, I can imagine the face of people seeing that scene really happening. Two priests dressed as Jesuits. And I have to say this again and again. Jesuits are beautiful. They are so elegant, so beautiful, so beautiful. They are beautiful. I don't think I ever saw an ugly Jesuit priest. I think if someone ugly somehow decided to become a Jesuit, they are going to keep him locked somewhere, not allowing him to walk around. And I can you imagine people knowing who Jesuits were in history, how they were the Inquisition itself, basically, entering in a karaoke parlor, and the people there will be like, okay, is the judgment day upon us already? Are they going to bar us if we get an oath wrong? Yes, probably they are.
But it's like, oh. And then we have our little coach scene in which they have a little conversation about, like, if that body really wasn't Julia's, where would Father Julia be? And, Joseph wants to know, and Roberto's like, oh, so you're still a little bit, like, obsessed? And it's like, no, not like that. I just want to know, like, what happened is, and uttering the same feelings of, like, I'm sure we are going to see him again. And you're like, oh, yeah. Father Julia's story and involvement in this series is not over yet.
And I like it because I want to know two things, basically. If he has Emmy's baby, and 2, is the baby is as well. And 3, I wanted to know 3 things. Was Bill involved with Emmy? Because the way he wants to know what happened to Emmy, it looks to me a little bit more personal than an FBI agent going around the world looking for clues about what happened to an American citizen.
Yeah. And I like FBI Bill. He's a good
Me too.
man. He saved our priest. Indeed. He arrested the bad guy. He's done a good job of his investigations because he does actually helpfully uncover things. And he doesn't come in all like American-like going, I'm taking over now. He's kind of helps them. And I'm like, you're a good guy, American Bill. American Bill?
Indeed.
FBI Bill.
FBI Bill. I like it.
But a beautiful conclusion to a beautiful little arc. I still, poor Roberto. He went through so much. And I still say there was probably a heavy dosing of drugs going on to send him a little bit mental. Snake poison in his tea. So, yeah. I bet Julia laced the books with a little bit of poison. I would put money on that so that he'd go a little bit even more obsessive because he absorbs it through his skin. Yeah. Poor.
Yes.
Poor Roberto. What a tragic backstory. But at least it ends with him, like, you see youthful him smiling and being, yes, right, Joseph, I'm not alone anymore. I have you. And you're just like, oh, these boys are so cute. Oh, I love them. Yeah, it's very cute. All right, Miss Gaia, do you have anything else to add?
No,
Oh. Well, for now, this is us saying byesy byes. Obviously, if you like Yaoi, listen to the rest of my Lizzie Watches Yaoi podcast on Pinecast or on YouTube. On YouTube, you can also find out lots of my other interesting videos and talks that I do, including mine and Gaia's horror podcast, Beneath Your Skin, for demonic possession. And if you just like anime in general, then check out my other podcast, Newbie vs. Weeaboo, in which me, an old school anime fan, introduces various animes to my never has watched anime friend and sees how she digests them. But for now, byesy byes.
Thank you for listening and bye bye.